morning, everyone. Thank you all very much for joining us. Joining me up here this morning are Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford and State Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Karen Salmon. For hundreds of thousands of children across Maryland, today marks the first day of the new school year. This morning, I enjoyed visiting Watt Chapel Elementary School here in Anne Arundel County to welcome students back to school. From day one, education has been a top priority of our administration. Not only have we fully funded education in all 24 jurisdictions, but we went far and above and beyond full funding by including more than the legislative formulas called for, investing a $25 billion in K through 12 education. No governor in the history of the state of Maryland has ever invested more in our schools. We are also creating a lockbox to ensure that all the casino revenue goes directly into the classrooms as was originally promised. This will mean an additional $4.4 billion more going into our classrooms. We also strengthened school safety and added school resource officers and mental health counselors to make our schools safer, because no mom or dad should ever have to worry when they send their kids off to school in the morning whether their son or daughter is going to come home safely. But providing record funding to our local schools isn't enough. We have also been leading the fight for more accountability in our local school systems, pushing to raise academic standards and to root out corruption and mismanagement, because I believe that every single child in Maryland deserves access to a world-class education, regardless of what neighborhood they happen to grow up in. In Maryland, we're proud to have some of the best schools in America, but unfortunately, far too many of our deserving children continue to be stuck in schools that have persistently failed them and failed to give them the education they deserve. Last year, despite the pleas and dire warnings from MSDE, the Maryland State Department of Education, and the Independent State Board of Education, the legislature passed a terrible piece of legislation, which they cynically called the Protect Our Schools Act. In reality, it was just the opposite of that. It's more appropriate to call it the Protect Our Failing Schools Act. This misguided bill makes it nearly impossible to improve persistently failing schools, and it made it nearly impossible for the state to even comply with federal law. ESSA, the Every School Succeeds Act, was the Obama administration's effort to fix failing schools all across America. We strongly supported the act and thought it provided great opportunities to make real progress in the schools and the communities that needed help the most. However, the legislature opposed these meaningful reforms, and instead they acted to directly threaten Maryland's well-earned reputation as a national leader in education. This terrible bill, which I vetoed and then they overrode, sadly is now state law, despite the strong objections of our administration and nearly all education experts. The misguided actions of the legislature over my strong objections and my veto forced Maryland to become the second least accountable school system in America, even though most people agree with me that we should be the most accountable in the nation. During the 2018 legislative session, we submitted emergency compromise legislation to try to get the legislature to at least take us from the second worst accountable up to at least the national average. Inexplicably, again, the legislature refused to even act on this legislation. As a result, MSDE was forced to submit an embarrassingly weak ESSA plan to the federal government. These low standards were forced by the legislature and were reluctantly accepted by Betsy DeVos and the current administration in Washington. But they are not acceptable to our administration, and they are not good enough for our children. This isn't about politics. This is about our kids and their futures. It's about giving every Maryland child the hope for a better future and the opportunities that they deserve. Despite the actions and the inaction of the legislature, we will continue our fight to improve Maryland's local schools, and we will continue to fight for more accountability in local school systems, because the status quo is simply not good enough for Maryland's children. Parents, students, and teachers are rightfully outraged that some of our children are being cheated out of the education they deserve and are being robbed of a better future. After repeated allegations of wrongdoing, mismanagement, and corruption, citizens have lost confidence in the leadership of their local school systems. In Baltimore County, the former superintendent of schools just finished serving a jail sentence for perjury after failing to disclose payments received from a company which he helped to secure no-bid contracts for the school system, from the school system. Another former Baltimore County employee has been indicted and served as an informant to a federal corruption investigation of a state senator. And after hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, they still cannot fix the problems of no air conditioning in Baltimore County. It's disgraceful. Howard County's former superintendent left in disgrace after misleading parents and teachers about dangerous mold in the classrooms. The problem was so bad at one Howard County school that several students and teachers became ill and required hospitalization. In spite of being the highest funded, one of the highest funded large school systems in America, recent investigative reporting discovered 5 Baltimore City high schools and 1 middle school that sadly did not have one single student who was proficient in any testing on any subject, and found that in 1/3 of all the high schools in Baltimore City, not one single student was proficient in math. One school administrator admitted that 70% of the middle and high schools in Baltimore City may be engaged in improper grade fixing in an effort to make schools just appear better on paper. In Washington County, a local school board member was removed following harmful and unprofessional comments on social media. In Prince George's County, the NAACP and frustrated teachers and parents have repeatedly called for change and for action to correct the systemic failures in that system. After the county refused to investigate allegations of widespread corruption, the Prince George's County delegation in the House of Delegates unanimously requested that the state investigate. The results of the initial investigative audit were extremely troubling. Just doing a sampling, they found more than 5,000 students who had their grades changed improperly, and students who were either ineligible or lacked documentation to graduate, sometimes with absence rates of over 40%, were still graduated improperly. County leaders dismissed these findings as sloppy record keeping and failing to dot I's and cross T's. But the State Board of Education was so troubled by the findings of the initial audit that they recently ordered a follow-up investigation to get to the bottom of this wrongdoing. That investigation is now currently underway. There is a persistent and alarming lack of accountability in local school systems across the state, and it cannot and it will not be tolerated by our administration. Not addressing it would mean failing the Maryland taxpayers who are paying for it, but more importantly, it would mean the responsible adults are failing our children, especially the ones who need our help the most. We invest more than $6.5 billion in state tax money every year into these local school systems for K through 12 education. They have received record state funding each year now for 4 years in a row. With that kind of state taxpayer investment, $25 billion in state tax dollars in 4 years invested in local school systems, taxpayers, parents, teachers, and especially students certainly deserve more accountability. They have a right to expect better results, better local management, and stronger oversight, and they deserve better. During the last legislative session, we provided $2.5 million in funding to create an education monitoring unit and an Office of Compliance and Oversight within MSDE. I want to thank Dr. Salmon for her partnership on this important initiative. We also introduced our Accountability in Education Act in order to establish an independent investigator general with the power to investigate allegations of corruption, improper and unethical behavior, and wrongdoing in our local school systems of the Maryland State Department of Education. You know what, I'm missing a page in here. That's kind of crazy. There we go. In our local school systems, but the legislature decided instead that there would be no real accountability at all for that $25 billion in state taxpayer money that we invest in the local school systems. Taxpayers, parents, and the governor strongly disagree. So today, I am announcing that on the first day of the next legislative session in January, we will introduce the Accountability in Education Act of 2019, which will create an Office of the State Education Investigator General. This new state education IG will be an independent unit of the Maryland State Department of Education and will be independently appointed by a commission which will consist of appointments made jointly by the governor, the president of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House. This new office will be charged with investigating complaints of unethical, unprofessional, improper, or illegal conduct in our schools. And this new state education IG will be able to make inquiries and to have the ability to obtain information by subpoena and to hold hearings in order to get to the truth. I want to sincerely thank all of the stakeholders from school districts across the state who have advocated so strongly for this accountability. And we look forward to working together with all of you to pass this important legislation early next year. But our children cannot and should not have to wait until the legislature returns to Annapolis in January. They deserve action beginning right now. And so today I am issuing an executive order which will establish the Office of Education Accountability, an independent watchdog unit. The director of the Office of Education Accountability will act as a liaison between local boards of education, the State Board of Education, and Maryland's concerned citizens. This new unit will be responsible for analyzing, coordinating, and providing recommendations on matters including procurement improprieties, abuse, neglect, safety, grade fixing, graduation requirements, assessments, educational facilities, and budgetary issues. The director will develop criteria for investigating matters based on systematic concerns related to fraud, abuse, improper misuse of funds, and unethical conduct. The director of the Office of Education Accountability will respond to complaints and concerns in a timely fashion, refer complaints to the State Board of Education or the public school official agencies or departments when appropriate, and will develop and maintain a database that tracks complaints and their resolutions. All suspected or alleged violations of criminal law will be forwarded to the state prosecutor or to the state's attorney for the county in which the jurisdiction exists in order to consider prosecution. The director of the Office of Education Accountability will submit an annual report on specific findings and recommendations related to alleged cases of misuse of funds, abuse, fraud, or unethical conduct. We will also encourage the Director of Accountability in Education to work collaboratively with local jurisdictions that already have inspector generals, including Baltimore City and Montgomery County. There have been widespread complaints of threatening and punishing whistleblowers who have been bringing forward complaints. In order to address this and to facilitate the work of the Office of Education Accountability, we have established, and today we are launching, an electronic tip program to allow for the anonymous reporting of any and all allegations in our education systems. Today, I am pleased to announce that Valerie Radomski, a former Baltimore County Public Schools teacher, who is the Education Policy Advisor to the Comptroller of Maryland, has been appointed to serve as the Director of the Office of Education Accountability. Valerie's work on education policy, where she reviewed yearly school maintenance reports, received and reported accountability concerns from parents, students, boards of education members, and teachers, and research complaints relating to procurement and school budgets, was invaluable to the Board of Public Works. She has built extensive relationships with parent advocates, Board of Education members, elected officials, students, and teachers. Valerie has the experience and the passion to serve as a tough but fair watchdog in this new role as we continue our fight for accountability in local school systems. Our children desperately need someone to fight for their civil rights, and that is exactly what we intend to continue to do. Now I'm going to authorize the executive order, and then I'll be happy to take a few questions.